Now, young people who say they're transgender may have mental health problems. That's what a new review is expected to advise, that children are not pushed into gender reassignment treatments. It's expected to publish these findings tomorrow.
Yes, instead they say that they should receive counselling to address potential mental health issues, a more holistic approach, one might say.
Well, paediatrician Dr. Hilary Cass will unveil her review, as we say, tomorrow. This comes as concerns rise surrounding children being allowed to identify as different genders at school without parental consent.
Well, the teacher, journalist and author of Transsexual Apostate, My Journey Back to Reality, Debbie Hayton, joins us now. Debbie, that sounds like a corker of a book. I must get a copy. Debbie, tell me what you make of this. We're hearing what is... The report is due to be published in full tomorrow. This is long awaited. Do you agree with the central premise here that children who are suffering with gender dysphoria or say they are of another gender than they were born as, than they are biologically, should be treated more holistically than pushed down a sort of treatment route or puberty blocker route or medicalisation?
Well, of course it is. Of course this is welcome. This is something that should have been happening all along. Children struggling with any number of issues growing up, the struggles that we all face through puberty, for example, to medicalise those issues and prescribe puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and not give the children the support they need has been a huge abrogation of duty by the NHS. And it's good that Dr. Cass has looked into this. And from what I understand, her report is going to perhaps bring us back towards reality.
Now, of course, puberty blockers were developed in the early 1990s, not to do with transgender issues. They were to do with children who were going through early onset puberty, who had other medical issues. They were approved by the administrative state in many different countries around the world for those specific ailments. Why is it, then, that there seems to be a growing movement to say they can never be used in the case of children who may be transgender, but they can be used in the case of children who are going through other issues?
Well, it's what you mean by children who may be transgender. What do we actually understand by this? Now, the drugs which we're talking about were originally developed as cancer treatment. They prevent the production of sex hormones in the body, where those sex hormones are an agonist for cancer. So that's where they were developed. They've also been used for chemical castration of sex offenders. And it's also been used, quite rightly, for children who undergo precocious puberty. So those are 4, 5, 6-year-olds who start going through puberty.
Shall we be clear on the puberty blocker issue? Because I don't believe it's the case that those have been used for castration purposes. I think it might be that you're talking about cross-sex hormones that have been used for those purposes.
No, these drugs. I took these drugs myself, so I know what those drugs do. What puberty blockers do. This is the name we've given them. It sounds so harmless, puberty blockers, but these are drugs which inhibit the production of the natural production of sex hormone in the body. That's what they do, and that's where they're used. Now, to use them in the case where children are going through puberty at age 4, 5, and 6, and to put a break on that puberty until perhaps 9 or 10 is one thing. There's obvious therapeutic benefit for that. But to go to a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old and say, we can stop this puberty for the time being to give you time to think, there is no basis in science to actually do that. 13, 14-year-olds have gone through this, find that all their peers all go through puberty, leaving them behind. So hence there is the clamour for cross-sex hormones, and the child's body is then permanently changed, and not in the way which their body had evolved to change. This has just been totally wrong. In the absence of any controlled studies, this has been experimental treatment which has gone on for far too long.
Debbie, do you think gender dysphoria is a mental health illness?
Well, we can say what is gender dysphoria? This is another term which has been invented, and nobody really knows what it is. Is it a dissatisfaction with our sex bodies? Well, lots of people can be dissatisfied with their sex bodies, or is it a label we put on something in order to access a certain treatment? Would gender dysphoria actually exist as a diagnosis if there wasn't a treatment for it? So I think there's lots of questions that need to be asked here. There's too many assumptions that have been made.
There have, of course, been cases throughout history of people presenting as other genders. You can find cases in Roman times. You can find cases in Victorian times. You can go and find cases...
We're talking about care for children and adolescents here, Tom. We're talking about care for children. We're talking about children potentially being pushed down a path, being affirmed, pushed down a path where they have irreparable changes to their body made that they cannot then reverse. Debbie, this is more important than just talking about, yes, there has been transgender people in the past. But if we're talking about... Debbie, we're talking about children potentially having life-changing treatment, aren't we?
Yes. Yeah, we can talk about characters in fiction. We can talk about Enid Blyton's George from the famous Five, for goodness sake, who perhaps engaged in cross-gender behaviour, whatever we like to call it. But nobody said to George, the answer for all your problems is drugs and surgery to permanently change your body.
I think the really important thing here, because we might be talking cross purposes, the question I think that many transgender people would bring up is, at what point is it okay for them to pursue what they might describe as their authentic self? Should adults be able to change their sex hormones? And then that leads to the question, if there are people who really do believe that that is the path that they are destined for, that they must go on, in some cases might that not be easier before their voice? This
review is into the treatment of children and adolescents, which is the subject of this conversation, isn't it, Debbie?
Yeah, and I think we can draw a line between adults and children. An analogy to take might be sterilisation treatment, vasectomies, for example. So we're quite happy for a 35-year-old who's had 3 children to have a vasectomy, but if an 18-year-old boy turned up for a vasectomy, we'd say this has got permanent repercussions. Go away and come back later. So we're happy with that in situations like that, and I don't see how this, which can do exactly the same thing to our bodies, i.e. make them permanently sterile, should be treated any differently.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Debbie Hayton. Great to get your opinion on all of this.